SJC-12358, Commonwealth versus Webster.
Mr. Curran, good morning.
Good morning. May it please the Court, Dana Curran for Stephen Webster. With me is Christy Nader. The main issue in this case is sufficiency of the evidence. There are cases that I've had, when I read a transcript, I wait for the other shoe to drop. I wait for that one piece of evidence or that one witness that conclusively ties the defendant to the case. And there are cases where that happens in the first witness, but in this case, the other shoe never dropped. There's just nothing more than speculation tying the defendant into this crime. The Commonwealth's theory was that Webster was physically present at the house during the murder. They get there by saying that, well, there's a rental car that David Evans rented, and there are some tire tracks there, and we didn't really see him, but Webster must have run out of the house with the other three and jumped in the car and driven off. My suggestion is that that theory depends on the invention of one of those Star Trek cloaking devices, which...
Well, do we have the telephones, which aren't quite Star Trek, but we have a lot of telephone tracking information connecting him close to the location, right? As well as his statement that he never crossed the bridge, so there's some consciousness of guilt issues evidence too, right?
I think that's right. The two cases that I think are most helpful to me are Gonzalez and Swafford, both of which involve consciousness of guilt. And I'll just talk about consciousness.
But why don't you deal with I think the telephone stuff is important. You want to address that?
Yeah, the telephone stuff, I think if the Commonwealth established that the 5120 number belonged to Webster, then I think the telephone information established that he was in the area at the time. I think that's about all it established. On the morning of the killing, there were no texts between, actually there were no texts involving that 5120 number. There was the 9676 number that the
that cuts against you though, doesn't it? Because that suggests that they're doing the work together. They're not communicating with each other.
Well, I don't think it does. I think what happened with the 9676 number is that was texting to Mac's phone, and it appears from the text that Mac is already in the house. So at about 12:08 to 12:10, they're texting about, it appears like pull in, something to that effect. So the car pulls in at about 12:10. Now, there are no further texts. It appears that that phone may very well have gone off with the car, which did not stay in the area. It seems to have disappeared prior to the time of the shooting.
I'm sorry, you're saying that 5120 with regard, 5120, there is at least reason based on the Facebook account to be his number.
If the Commonwealth may very well have established that.
And you're saying that we know, do we have the GPS or with regard to the location of that particular phone?
The Commonwealth has some cell tower sector information, and that appears to show that it is in the area. Not necessarily in the sector where, during the crime, not necessarily in the sector where each cell tower is divided into 3 sectors. And I do not believe that there's anything tying him, the 5120 number, actually into the sector where that house is.
Well, they certainly have between 12:30 and 2:30. They have both Webster and Evans near the Barnstable Airport. So it is in a relatively small area, certainly over the bridge.
Well, I mean, I think they may have him in the area. They may even have him in the car, because there's evidence that there is, his DNA is found in the back seat of the car. What they don't have is they don't have him as the driver. They don't have him present at the house. There's no physical evidence present at the house. Nothing's found in the house. When the three people jump out of the window and take off, they abandon a bunch of things, and that includes 3 guns, not 4. There's a gun that's found outside of the window, and there were 2 guns found in the backpack.
Well,
No, go ahead.
you've got Rudy Carrero's observation from the BMW lot, right? You've got, and I know you're going to talk about the tire tracks and why that shouldn't be considered, but you've got the tire tracks, and then you've got the 4 perpetrators. One isn't apprehended, and you've got Rudy Carrero's testimony, and then, and this might put aside the DNA and the mask, then you've got the Impala with the New Jersey plates 1.5 miles from the defendant's house. And I understand, you've got a joint venture felony murder theory here, but why is that not enough that he was the getaway driver at least?
Well, I mean, you have to show more than the possibility that he was the driver. You have to show that he was the driver. And this court said that in Swafford. This court said that in Gonzalez. And in both of those cases, the person who is alleged to have been driving the car owned the car or had access to the car. This was actually Evans' rental car. This was not Webster's car. It was in Gonzalez, a van matching the description dropped off the shooters and then drove off. And then 15 or 20 minutes later, it was seen driving one of the shooters back to somebody else's house with the defendant driving it.
So I don't know what the answer is, but one of the most important issues, maybe the most important issue on this efficiency is, based on Lattimore, whether or not a reasonable jury could have found that he was the driver.
And I don't think there's any evidence establishing that he was the driver. Nobody ever saw him driving the car, ever. The Commonwealth draws an inference that there were 4 people. Well, there may have been 4 people, there may have been 5 people, there may have been somebody else, because that car, when it left, drove up to Andover and then drove down to Boston, and it ended up being recovered 1.6 miles from the defendant's house in a very densely populated area. That's like saying, we found a car in the Prudential garage, and must have been Dana's because we know he was going to the SJC. Well, it's kind of a long way off in a very densely populated area. I don't see how you can draw an inference that he might have driven in that car, he might have been a passenger, but I don't think you can draw an inference that he was the driver, and I don't think you can draw any kind of inference as to his role in the killing, because...
What inferences can you draw from the texts that are going back and forth that morning? Anything?
I think the texts going back and forth were that early in the morning, apparently the victim was not there. Mac and the phone attributed to Evans were texting each other, and he apparently wasn't there, and there was some talk about you should have hit him.
Webster's phone. Webster doesn't text during this time period? I can't remember.
Webster doesn't text.
5120 doesn't text during?
It does not text that day. The first activity of any significance is an hour after the
So it doesn't
shooting.
call or text during the time period? I've forgotten.
No, he doesn't.
And so after we've got there was the text at 2:21.
Yes.
But I couldn't figure out, they said this was a special kind of text where you could not identify the
There was
120 to 7295, which I guess is MAC.
That's Mac, and it is one of these things where it doesn't show who is texting, and then there's a call.
We know what the text says?
I think there's actually an attempted call with that blocked, and then there's a text that goes from a different phone. One of them is from the Webster phone, and one of them is from the Evans phone, and it says something like it's Grime, hit me back. So.
And was there anybody, by the way, who was helping to interpret these texts?
Well, I don't think so. The Webster's Facebook page refers to him by the nickname Stiz Grimy. So if you draw the inference that that's him, then that text and attempt to call comes an hour after the shooting.
And hit me back, we should understand to mean call me back?
Call me back. And had he been at the house and had he somehow managed to drive this car past the witnesses and the police and drive off, knowing that the other three had hopped the fence and were being chased by the police, I'm not sure why there wouldn't be a call at 1:20 instead of 2:20.
By the way, did anyone explain the text on 7/3/12, what those mean? Got some heat lined up, bring them rolly up. I don't. Were any explanation provided of what that actually means?
No explanation.
Okay.
And I think heat has a lot of meanings. Some probably nefarious and some not. Rolly, my understanding from the Urban Dictionary is it's some kind of cigarette and possibly marijuana cigarette, but we don't know. There's nothing there. And as far as Webster being present at the scene and possibly knowing what was something was going on, and possibly even loaning his backpack or something, or maybe the mask, there is no evidence that he was aware that what was going to happen was an armed robbery and a murder, as opposed to maybe a large drug deal.
Now, I gather his DNA was on the mask. What did the mask look like?
There's a picture of the mask the mask inadvertently wasn't introduced. There's a picture of the mask in the Commonwealth supplemental appendix on page 29. And I think that the mask is a red herring, and I'll tell you why. All of the stuff from the crime, the 2 guns, a stun gun, the duct tape, some zip ties, and I believe one of the phones was found in the main compartment of the backpack. I suggest that when the shooting took place and maybe when the police arrived, one of the persons who fled threw that all in and jumped out the window, jumped over the fence, and dropped the backpack. The mask was actually found some months later when they actually started looking at the backpack, and it was found in a different pocket. I'm not sure why somebody gathering up the guns and all the other evidence and trying to run out the window is going to take time to zip that up and then unzip a different pocket and put the mask in there. But I also suggest that if they had found 4 masks inside of the main compartment, maybe you'd say that the mask might be connected. But this is 1 mask, and I think the strong inference is that mask probably had nothing to do with the killing. The victim was actually friends with Mac, and I don't know if he knew these other people, the other people involved. He may very well have, because they apparently did go down to the Cape a couple of days before. But this was not an armed home invasion. This was apparently, it may have been, if it was planned to be a robbery and a murder, it was probably set up as, hey, there's going to be a drug deal. And so they probably came in voluntarily. There's no, this was the inference that 4 people burst in wearing masks, I don't think is supported by anything in the record.
It came in voluntarily, 3 guys carrying guns?
Well, I'm not sure if anybody knew that there were guns. The victim knew that there were guns. We don't know how it happened. We just know that things started happening about an hour after this pull-in text message went. That's when the first shots were fired.
And how many persons' DNA was found on the mask? I gather more than Webster.
He was apparently, I think he was the only one who's, the only one of the ones of the perpetrators whose DNA was found on it. But there's...
But I gather there was more than one person's DNA found on it.
I think there was, but I don't think there's anybody else connected to the offense. Commonwealth versus Morris, which I did not cite in the brief, it's 422 Mass 254. It's a 1996 case. That talks about a home invasion involving 4 masks, 4 people. And on the way out, one of the masks got dropped on the stairs. And on that mask, they found the defendant's fingerprint. And this court found that that was insufficient to establish his identity as one of the perpetrators because we don't know when the fingerprint was left. My suggestion is that, again, the mask is a red herring. The mask may have been sitting in that backpack for 6 months, and Webster may have said, here, borrow my, if you're going to bring in money or bring out drugs or whatever it is, borrow my backpack, and the mask happened to be there, completely unrelated to the crime.
The police officers recognized Thomas and Mack. Do they live in the Cape? I'm confused by. They recognized 2 of the 4, right?
Well, I know that Thomas lives in Bierce's Way, which is a fairly short distance away from where the crime took place.
So the car, is Webster the only person who doesn't live on the Cape?
Evans lived in Quincy. Webster did not live there. I think Mack lived in Boston also. I'm not sure. He may have...
Police officers on the Cape recognize Mack, even though he lives in Boston?
That may have been the case.
Okay.
He may have had some involvement down there.
Can you discuss 9676 as to the evidence that linked that to Evans?
Well, I think the Commonwealth took the position that that was the Evans phone. They planned to call 2 witnesses to tie that phone to him. One of them is his former girlfriend. One of them, they actually both had the same first name. I think one of them took the fifth and didn't testify, and the other one just didn't have any memory. So what the Commonwealth did was they established that the phone calls were made from that phone to the other co-defendants, and that phone calls were made to Evans' mother. And I think that's how they attempted to establish that it was his phone.
I think also Mack had, I think the Evans nickname is Trigger, and that Mack had that number as TR in his phone.
That's right. So that's the evidence. I don't think it's all that convincing, but and I'm not sure if it was admitted to Benny, and there was a motion to strike, and the judge, despite having heard very little evidence tying that into Evans, was not able to, or denied the motion to strike and admitted it.
The tire issue is sort of important. You have a minute left. Could you address that?
Well, I think the tire issue, we don't know when the tire marks were left there. And we don't know that there was an actual match. And the Commonwealth, I think, conceded that it wasn't an actual match. I think the problem is that a jury looking at that is going to maybe say that, well, the Commonwealth must know something that we don't know. This must be a pretty close match. This must be a match, even though they're not saying it. And it must establish that the rental car was there. Now, I'm not sure without more of a foundation, I don't think there was enough to connect that to the car. I think that's a standard all-weather tire pattern that they found out back, and I don't think they conclusively matched it, and it is to some degree misleading to admit that.
Would it have been misleading if it did not match?
If it didn't match, it might be, well, it probably wouldn't be prejudicial,
It would be exculpatory a little bit.
possibly.
So if it would matter if it did not match, is it at least relevant that it did? Not match, that it was consistent with?
Well, I mean, I think if they narrowed the time period, but the thing is though, I think that rental car, if it was there, was long gone before the shooting took place, for a number of reasons that I've laid out in the brief and in this argument. And so I don't think it's relevant at all, except to the fact that maybe if it was consistent or if it did match, then maybe that car was there at one point. And I'm not sure if anybody's saying that car was never there. And I think that car may have been there a couple of days earlier when they went down to the Cape. So it's really inconclusive evidence, but with the potential to mislead.
Any testimony as to rain or other weather over the course of those days?
No testimony on that.
And any testimony on cross as to how many all-weather tires may have had comparable treads?
I think there was some cross, and I think the officer who testified said that it's consistent with what was on this car or with any other similar all-weather tire. And, it looks an awful lot like the same pattern on the tires on my minivan, but which are Michelin's. But
Where were you
This
that day?
is him speaking or you speaking?
that's me speaking.
Oh,
But that's not in the record, of
They haven't
course.
followed up with you yet?
No, they haven't. They haven't. I'm sure they will. Unless there are any further questions, I'll leave the remaining points to the brief. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sweeney, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. May it please the court, Elizabeth Sweeney on behalf of the Commonwealth. Viewing the evidence in the light most favorable to the Commonwealth, the evidence was sufficient to convict the defendant of first-degree felony murder. This case is a strong circumstantial evidence case, and I know the court is very familiar with all the little pieces of facts that went into this case. But Rudy Carrero saw a fourth man run out of that house. He saw him between the fence slats. And four men, the four defendants in this case, had been texting and calling and communicating with each other for 10 days prior to the armed home invasion. And at the time of the homicide, Webster's phone, the 5120, was pinging in that area at 30 Otis Road. It was using a tower in that area. And according to Webster, he's never been to the Cape, doesn't know where the bridge is, has never been to Barnstable. But his phone is pinging in that area, and at 2:21, a little shy of an hour after the shots are fired, he calls the co-defendant, 7295, the one who has the $15,000, the bag of phones, and the marijuana. He uses *67. That *67 blocks his number. So on 7295, it's going to come up as blocked or unknown, similar when you get a call from a telemarketer. No answer. So then 9676, which is Evan's phone, is in that same area, and what we assert is Webster uses that phone and texts 7295, again, Mac, the one with the money, the drugs, and the cell phones. What up, bro? Hit me back. It's Grime. And the Commonwealth established at trial that Stephen Webster's street name is Grimy. So less than an hour after the home invasion and the homicide, the defendant is reaching out to his co-venturer in a covert, somewhat sneaky, very careful way as these people ran away and he, as the Commonwealth asserts, left in the car that was parked behind the house. I filed a motion to transmit the video of the crime scene to the court so you could see exactly where we assert the car was, where the house was, and the fence, because it's somewhat confusing. What you're going to see is, if this was the house, the driveway wraps around the back, and say this was the road. The police were standing on the corner, and this was the fence between the BMW dealership and the house. So due to the brush and the fact that the car was over here, when they see three men, after hearing shots fired, jump out of a window, they're gonna go that way after the men who they believe are armed since they just heard gunshots. So all Webster has to do to leave is to get in the car, drive out this way, take a left or even go straight, and he's not gonna run into the police at all because you have the main street, and you'll see this all in the video that I
By
moved
the
to
way,
transmit.
is this where the tire prints came from?
The tire prints came from the back of the, it's like a dirt driveway that wraps around the back.
Where you're saying the car was parked?
Yes. And the Commonwealth asserted that he fled with that car based on the CSLI, the cell phone location information. You have the 9676 number and the 5120 number driving or moving off Cape at a very high rate of speed. So clearly Webster had to have it escaped in some manner using a car. And there was a car at the scene. You'll see a text message from 9676 to 7295. 9676 is Evans saying still pull in. And that's about, I'd say, 5 minutes prior to when there's no text communication
From
between all
who
of
to
them.
who? Sorry, it's from what number to what number?
9676, which we assert is Evans. He texts 7295, still pull in. That's after 7295 texts him, we at table. Is it good? They're going back and forth as to where their locations are.
So does that suggest that 5120 is not driving the car?
That suggests that 5120 is with him, 9676 is driving the car. 9676 Evans is the one that rented the car. I moved to transmit the rental agreement, and that had Evans' address, 10 High Point Circle, Quincy, as the address on it, as well as a phone that we attribute to him, not the 9676 number. But the 5120 and the 9676, Webster and Evans, are the only two that are from Boston, Quincy and Dorchester,
Can I just take
respectively.
a step back? So we've got 4 guys going to this house. Mac knows the victim, right?
Yes.
So, and you know, I'm just trying to understand what is the new felony murder rule apply to this case or the old felony murder rule?
Old felony murder rule.
Old felony murder applies
Yes.
to this case, okay.
This case was in 2012. It was tried in 2016, so pre-Commonwealth v. Brown.
So if he's driving up thinking they're doing a drug deal, and he's driving the car or whatever, and he's convicted of felony murder, right?
Yes.
So if he's only, and we know that there are guns present, I'm just trying to do the felony murder analysis in my head, given how little, we got so much circumstantial evidence here.
Yes, we
And
do.
I understand, we have a lot of circumstantial evidence indicating that he's in the car going to the Cape, and probably there. I'm just trying to understand how he knows there's a murder. You know, he knows this is going to be a robbery as opposed to some kind of regular drug deal. I'm doing this in my head. That's not very clear.
The calls and the text message of them communicating with, they do somewhat of a dry run from the evening of the 9th to the 10th. They go down to the Cape, leave, and come back to that same area, as well as the fact that, you know, they're texting about my little heat. We didn't have an expert come in and say as to what these terms mean, but the jury is to infer what they believe they're talking about.
Were the juries to infer that heat means guns?
We didn't introduce that, but they can read the text messages and decide, you know, what their intent or what they're discussing.
And there are 3 guns. Are there DNA connecting anybody to the guns?
There's no DNA on the guns. There were 3 guns. There's a 25, a 45, and a 9mm. There's also a knife. There's a stun gun. There was handcuffs, duct tape, and plastic zip ties. And notably, the zip ties had the victim's DNA on them, which was in the backpack with the mask with the defendant's DNA on it.
No DNA connecting the defendant to the house, though, right? The defendant's DNA is not in the house. It's in the car. It's on the mask.
It's in the car and the mask and the backpack that was right on the other side of the fence when the code events were jumping over.
What were the inculpatory text messages? What did they say?
5120 text 9676 that he wants to get his lil heat up in Norfolk. They talk about rollies in the armrest. It's my understanding that rollies could be interpreted to be bullets, because why would you store marijuana in an armrest?
We've had a fair amount of marijuana stored in armrests, haven't we?
Yes, but in the context of right after a text message about a gun, or what I'm saying is a gun, I don't think they're going to switch.
The most important one, or salient, is a reference to heat
Yes,
involving the defendant
yes,
before the invasion, before the crime.
yes, exactly. And I believe that was on 7/3/2012. And then they continue talking about going down to Plymouth and having a friend who's going to run some addresses, who's a tow truck driver, run some info for them, and then the home invasion occurs.
So the 3 guns and the stun gun are found, actually, 2 of the guns plus the stun gun are found in the backpack, correct?
Yes.
And the backpack was taken out of the house by whom? Who
The
was carrying
backpack wasn't found inside the house. It was found where the men had jumped over the picket fence where they broke the fence. It was on the, so there's a picket fence, and you'll see in the video what exactly I'm talking about, but there's a very dilapidated, broken picket fence you can see through. When they jumped over that, they appear to have dropped the backpack,
You
and
say they, that was, I thought, Evans.
Thomas, Mack, and Evans jumped over the fence.
Okay, so Thomas, Mack, and Evans, so one of those 3 has a backpack with all these guns.
The kit, yes, to conduct the armed home invasion.
But I get the impression that the firing of the gun and their flight was quick.
Yes, it was very quick. The police responded for shots fired. They responded to the area. While they're outside, they hear another shot. That's right after Kiko Thomas peeks out the window. They know him because he's a Cape guy. And then they jump out the window, the 3. The police officers see, I believe Cronin saw 2. Rudy Carrero, not a police officer, saw the 4. And then the backpack is found feet from where this window is. The window is very close to the fence, the broken fence.
And the fatal shot came from one of the guns in the backpack.
The 45. The casing matched the 45. The projectile inside the victim, they couldn't say it's from that 45, but it was the only 45 gun that was found in this area.
And I gather multiple shots were fired. How many shells, or if any, did they find inside?
The mystery is that there was only one casing that was found, only one 45 casing that was
And
found.
were these revolvers or were these pistols?
They were semi-automatic.
So they would have ejected a shell, you would think, generally?
Yes, yeah.
And so the theory is they fired these shots, then put them inside a backpack, and then ran?
When you say them, are you referring to the guns putting inside?
Guns, yeah.
Yes, yeah. There's enough time for them to pack up their home invasion kit and escape. And all 4 of them did. 3 got caught, and 1 jumped in a car.
When you say home invasion, it brings up a question about what were the underlying felonies for the felony murder. Was it robbery and home invasion?
It
or
was
just-
armed robbery was the underlying.
There was no home invasion underlying.
They were
fel-
indicted for home invasion. They were found guilty of that, but armed robbery was the
But
underlying.
home invasion's a life felony too, and,
Yes.
and going back to Justice Kafker's point about whether or not the underlying felony would be a first-degree murder, a life felony.
Right.
Okay.
Turning briefly to the tire track issue.
By the way, the guns, so a couple of things. You say 2 of the guys are Cape guys. Are 3 of the 4 Cape guys, or just 2 of the 4
Kiko
Cape?
Thomas and Eddie Mack are Cape guys. The other 2, Stephen Webster and Evans, are from the Boston area. If you look at the
Evans rented the car?
Evans rented the car, and if you look at the CSLI, you'll see their phones pinging in the same area. They're different carriers. This was prior to T-Mobile and Metro PCS merging, so they're using different towers, but in a consistent area up and down Route 3.
And the evidence connecting the defendant to a gun is the text message about the heat. That's
5120 would be Webster, and that would be the text
and
message.
he's the one saying, what does he say about the heat?
He said, going down to Norfolk to pick up my little heat.
Okay.
And I'm paraphrasing, but he talks about going to get a little heat.
And how do we know rollies or bullets? I've heard rollies as marijuana. I've never heard rollies as bullets. How are we supposed to make that jump?
That wasn't admitted at trial. I was just referring to Attorney Curran's argument that it was marijuana. It'd be my understanding. My Urban Dictionary experience or Google
So does your Urban Dictionary have anything about rollies in it?
I
being bullets?
researched it. We didn't introduce it at trial. I just wanted to know what they were talking about when I came up here.
The Evans home was where, in comparison to Webster's?
I believe Evans was 10 High Point Circle and Quincy, an apartment.
And Webster was in Dorchester?
98 Devon Street in Dorchester.
Okay, but the car is found 1.6 miles away. Where was it found?
It was found on the corner of Burrell Street and another street that I'm sorry is escaping my name.
In which area of Boston?
I don't know Boston that well, but I just know they found it, they testified that it was in Boston.
1.6 miles away.
It was 1.6 miles away.
But
It's-
what inference are we to draw? That's not, it's usually not that tough to get a parking space in Dorchester, that you have to park at 1.6 miles away. So what inference do we take from that?
That it was found 1.6 miles away about a day and a half after the homicide. It's found up in that area, and his DNA was on it, and he lives a mile and 1.6 miles away. So it's not as though he left it on Cape Cod or drove it up to his area.
How
where
far
he's
does
from.
Evans live away from there?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Evans lives how far away?
That wasn't introduced at trial. I don't know, and I don't know Boston that well. I'm from the Cape.
So
So we,
I'm sorry.
no, it's,
can a reasonable jury without expert testimony infer that pick up heat means get a gun, going to get a gun?
I think that they're permitted to read the text messages and decide, in their own interpretation as to what they're talking about. They can view it as meaning gun or just take everything in consideration, decide what these people are discussing and talking about planning.
Did the prosecutor make that argument in a closing argument?
No.
Am I correct that you need there to be a fourth person in the house?
In order to find him guilty of first-degree felony murder? I don't want to concede, but that's our theory of the case. That's what we're proceeding on. I think that we've established that beyond a reasonable doubt. So,
But without that, you'd have to show that when he dropped them off, he knew that they were about to engage in an armed robbery.
exactly. And I believe the Commonwealth can establish that on his conduct right after the shots are fired. The fact that he takes those two steps, calling the 7295, the guy who has the $15,000 from a blocked number, and then uses the co-defendant's phone, who's in the car, the phone is in the car, to text him instead of using his own phone within a minute of each other. So he's clearly going to finish this off. He's going to find the $15,000 or pick up his co-venturers. He stays in that Cape area for a little while, at least the 5120 number does. I can't say that his phone's there. And he's making effort and staying there to contact these people. So I think that that would be sufficient to finish off the underlying felony, to get the drugs and money and phones that they went there for.
the person who says he observes the fourth person, Carrero, right? Somebody says that they see the fourth person, right?
Rudy Carrero, yes.
Does he see them going in the direction of the car, or does he just see four people? Is this fourth person spotted heading towards the car?
So his testimony was that he saw 3 people jump over the fence broke. Then
Right.
he saw a person run out to the fence, turn around and run back. And he reported to the police that there was another person inside the house.
So the fourth person who's running back, is that in the direction of the car?
Well, if they were to jump over the fence and the car was to be here, yeah, it would be in the direction of the car and the house. So he said they ran back to the house.
Is running back, that fits in your, I don't know where the car is, but it fits in your description of where the car is?
It would be heading in that direction. If this was a house and this is the car and Rudy was over here, then yes, it would be in that direction. And I'd briefly like to address the tire track evidence. It was a photo in the casting that was taken at the crime scene. It was on the video that I moved to transmit to this court. And it is a link in the Commonwealth's chain that there was a car there based on the fact that Evans had rented an Impala on only 5 days prior. And 9676 texts the 7295 number, still pull in. So what was he discussing? He was talking about pulling his car in, and there's no car there. So the Commonwealth is permitted to introduce the tire track evidence and show the jury, this is the print, and this is what the print was of the tire on the car.
But what inference, are you saying that that inference alone is sufficient for us to say that the car was there?
No, not that inference. Again, this is a very, very circumstantial case, but the prints of the tire that were consistent with the make and model, the Goodyear tire, the text message still pull in, the fact that somehow Stephen Webster's CSLI got off the Cape at a very, very high rate. Somehow he left, and the car was found 1.6 miles from his house. So I think it's just another chip in the Commonwealth's case to show that there was a car there.
But, but I'm trying to think of, it seems to me that its weight is simply more of a Bowden weight, that you did check it out and it was not inconsistent, but all-weather tires, there could be, was there any evidence as to how many hundreds of thousands of tires Goodyear makes?
There's probably millions of all-weather Goodyear tires, and the jury heard that it was a very, very, very common model. A specific number wasn't introduced, but they heard that there were these two tire tracks that were casted, and the inference was left for the jury. It was just it's a crime scene photo of a tire at the house. It was left, we didn't say that it was a match, we couldn't say that it was a match, but just that it was consistent with that make and model.
Was there any evidence that anyone saw the car in the area?
Nobody saw the car.
Sorry. So two of them don't come in a car. Is it walking distance from one of their homes? I can't remember that.
Yes, 130 Burses Way, or Burses Way is very close to,
How close is Bursa's Way? Roughly.
I'd say a mile and a half. I could be wrong. I don't know that part of the Cape that very well.
and-
But it's on a map, and I submitted
And the phone, and do we have two people? Because some people are already there and some people are pulling up.
yes.
Do we have phone connecting? The person who lives at Bursa's Way, is his phone pinging from Bursa's Way the night before?
It was. Kiko Thomas left his cell phone. He's the resident of Burses Way. He left his phone at his house during the armed robbery, and they recovered it a day later when they executed a search warrant at his house. And if there are no further questions, I rest on my brief.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.